This Sicha, in addition to being a Sicha on Parshas Vayakhel, is also a Siyum on Hilchis Beis HaBchira. Says the Rebbe, in the end of the last page of Hilchis Beis HaBchira, where the Rambam is explaining the dinim of Shmiras HaMikdash, guarding the Beis HaMikdash. So after he describes in the second to the last halacha, halacha Yud Aleph, how the Koyanim would every single morning, before dawn, just before dawn, they would check with torches of fire in their hands. They would check around the Azara to make sure that everything is in order. The Rambam concludes in the very last halacha, halacha Yud Beis, as a separate halacha for itself, which will be discussed later why it's a separate halacha, that this is the Seder that they did every single night, besides the night of Shabbos, meaning Friday night. Then they wouldn't be carrying around fire. Rather, they would check by the lamps that were burning there from Erev Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, it's known the question of the Mefarshim. The halacha is, and the Rambam himself says this in a number of places, there's a concept of ein shvus b'mikdash. Many of the prohibitions, the rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbos, many of them are called shvus, and those things do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. So carrying the lamps on Shabbos, carrying these torches on Shabbos, would be in that category of an isur of a prohibition called a shvus. So if that's the case, why do we have to do anything different on Shabbos, not to be carrying on Friday night, not to be carrying these torches, and rather they have to be using the lamps that were burning from Erev Shabbos? Says the Rebbe, the Kesef Mishnah answers that in this case it's different, because you could use lamps that were burning there from Erev Shabbos. So since there is an ability to do the same checking of the Azara, and in a way where you are avoiding doing the Shavuos, this is why, in this particular case, the Chachamim did not permit us to do this Shavuos in the Beis HaMikdash. However, says the Rebbe, this answer is tzarachiyun and needs further examination. And as in fact, some of the Mefarshim ask, the Rambam himself paskins in Hilchos Avodas Yom HaKippurim, that if the Kohen Gadol was elderly or unwell, they would heat up rods of iron in fire from before Yom Kippur, and then the following day in the morning they would put it into the water in order to take away some of the chill, some of the coldness of the water. And the Rambam explains why, because ein shvus b'mikdash, because again this would be an isur of shvus, but it doesn't apply in the Beis HaMikdash. Now in this case too, it could have been taken care of in another way, in a way that it's not going to involve a shvus. As the Rambam himself gives another example what could be done, he says you could mix in hot water into the mikveh to take away some of the coldness, some of the chill. So why is it that we're allowing the putting in the metal rods into the mikveh, which would be a shvus, if we have another way of doing it? The Rebbe says furthermore, the Rambam paskins, again this is still within the halachas of Yom Kippur. So the Rambam says that if the Kohen Gadol is starting to fall asleep, he wants to fall asleep, they keep him up, the Pirchei Leviyah, the young Koyanim, would snap their fingers in order to keep him awake. And once again, this is a shvus, as the Rambam himself paskins in Hilchos Shabbos. And in this case too, there are other ways of how to keep the Kohen Gadol awake, and yet we're saying that there's no problem in keeping the Kohen Gadol awake this way, although it's a shvus. Says the Rebbe, simply, we can differentiate between these cases, between our case of checking the Beis HaMikdash with a fire and these other cases. And why is that? Because the rule of ein shvus b'mikdash, and we say that it'll apply even if you could do it another way, as in these examples that we just gave with the Kohen Gadol. So that will only apply if it's sort of a one-off situation or unusual situation. In other words, there's a special condition that you're going to now deal with it by doing a shvus. So we say no problem. There's ein shvus b'mikdash, even if you could have technically done it in another way. So for example, again in our case, the Kohen Gadol is elderly or unwell, or he's falling asleep. So clearly this is an unusual case. And therefore we allow to do these things even though they're a shvus. But in other words, we can't allow that there should be a permanent seder, a permanent way that we always do it in a way of shvus, unless it's a particular condition, a particular situation, and then we use this heter. However, in our case with checking the Beis HaMikdash on a regular basis, that the Kohanim are going to check every single Shabbos. This is a very totally different situation. And therefore, since there is another way of doing it, so we don't establish that the Kohanim should do it on a regular basis, something that's going to involve the Shavuos, even though it's in the Beis HaMikdash. However, says the Rebbe, this explanation is still not enough, because we find the idea of a heter of Shavuos in the Beis HaMikdash, even in a case where it is the regular thing that is done, not only in an unusual situation. And what is this case? So we have an Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. So part of what needs to be done is you need to skin the animal of the carbon. And the way they would do it is putting it over particular maklois, particular sticks of how they would skin the animal. Now this again is a shvus, and yet on Shabbos it was done exactly as it was done during the week, even though there are other ways of skinning the animal. And the Rebbe says it's a doichek to say that since it's Erev Pesach Shechol B'Shabbos itself only comes once in a while, that's why it's considered as an unusual case. Because at the end of the day, it is something that does happen every once in a while. It's still happening. We are setting this as a normal order. So therefore, we're back to the original question of why we are concerned with carrying around those flames on Shabbos to check the Beis HaMikdash. Now the Rebbe says that in these halachas at the end of Hilchas Beis HaBchira, there are some other general diyukim. Number one, why is it that the Rambam brings this idea, these last two halachas of checking the Beis HaMikdash, in Hilchas Shmiras, in the halachas that are discussing the guarding of the Beis HaMikdash? In other words, that's what this whole perek is about, guarding the Beis HaMikdash. The halachas up until this point, in this perek, we understand how they belong here. In other words, they're all directly connected with guarding the Beis HaMikdash. However, these ideas of halacha Yud Aleph and Yud Beis seemingly don't have anything to do with the actual guarding of the Beis HaMikdash. Rather, these are things that are more being done as a preparation for the Seder Avodas Hayom, for the Avodah that's going to be happening during the day. So there is something that needs to be done. We need to check the whole Azara to make sure that everything is in its proper place and everything is there in its proper way, so that we can do the Avodas Hayom. This kind of halacha belongs in Hilchas Tamidin Umusafin. In fact, over there it is brought very briefly. But the question is, what does this have anything to do with the halachas of Shmiras Beis HaMikdash, as the Kohanim are standing around and watching in all the different places all night long, etc.? The next question that Rebbe asks is, the last halacha Yud Beis, is a direct continuation from the previous halacha. The Rambam described how the Kohanim would walk around the Beis HaMikdash to check that everything is okay before the Avodah. And the Rambam explicitly says, Ucheseder hazeh, that's the way he says in Halacha Yud Beis, that this order, what we just said in Halacha Yud Aleph, this is done every single night. That's what he starts this halacha with saying. And now he adds that Shabbos was different. So why does the Rambam have to put this in a separate halacha for itself? And as we know, that it's a famous thing that the vision of the Rambam's halachas are very, very precise as well. And in fact, there are certain things that are learned from the fact that the Rambam put it into two separate halachas. Says the Rebbe, the explanation of all of this is as follows. The Rambam explains in the beginning of the Perek, when dealing with the whole concept of Shmiras HaMikdash, guarding the Beis HaMikdash, that it's not because of the fear of enemies or anything of the like is why we're guarding the Beis HaMikdash. Rather, it's considered a guarding of honor. It's the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. As the Rambam says, you cannot compare a palace that has guards to a palace where there are no guards. This is part of the honor of the Beis HaMikdash, the respect of the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, from this we can understand that the details that are discussed in this Perek and the whole Perek are all related to this idea of Kavod HaMikdash, the respect and the honor for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, based on this we could say that this idea that they checked before the Avodah around the Beis HaMikdash, that everything is in order, is actually part of the Kavod of the Beis HaMikdash. And this is why the Rambam is putting these halachos into the end of the Perek. And the Rebbe explains that this bedika, this checking, was done mainly not only as a preparation for the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, and then we ask, why doesn't it belong in other halachis? But rather, it's being done as the honor for the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe says that it's explained elsewhere at length. This is another Sicha of the Rebbe, Now, what is the honor of the Beis HaMikdash over here? What it consists of is that when we're guarding it, what we're showing is that we're never taking our mind off the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, there's constantly someone that is actively thinking about the Beis HaMikdash. These people that are showing on the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, the same thing is true regarding this bedika. The fact that it is being checked every early morning this itself is part of the honor, how we're honoring, showing that respect for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, based on this, will also be very, very geschmack. Where the Rambam says that the Koyanim that checked, so at the end of it, they say to each other, Shalom, HaKoil Shalom, peace, everything is peace. Now, seemingly, it would have been more appropriate to use some sort of expression that everything is in order, everything is ready for the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe gives some examples. You could say HaKoil B'mkoimoy or HaKoil Koroi or something similar to that. What is the idea of Shalom, HaKoil Shalom? Because this is an expression of honor, of respect, of kavod. Says the Rebbe, now we could go back to understand our question that we had about this halacha regarding the Shvus. But first, by one more introduction. The Rebbe says we know in regards to the nace of the oil of Hanukkah, when they made Tomei, all the oil in the Heichel. And the story was that they checked, they looked, they didn't find but only one jug of oil that was there with a chaysim, with a seal of the Kohen Gadol. There was only enough for one day to burn, and a miracle happened, and they lit from it for 8 days. Says the Rebbe, there's a known question about this. There is an opinion that says that Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, that Tumah is completely becomes permitted when we're dealing with the tzibur. Meaning to say that since over here, all of the oil would have been tamei, and it wouldn't be any other possibility, so you were able to actually use the tamei oil. Says the Rebbe, according to this opinion, the question is, why does Hashem need to make a miracle with the oil? You could just use the candles, the lamps of the menorah with tamei shemen. Says the Rebbe, that the Mefarshim explain that even though it's true that Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, that it would have been allowed, no problem, but in this case, Hashem wanted to show how much He loves the Yidden, Chibosan Shal Yisrael, how much He cherishes, how precious the Yidden are. And therefore Hashem performs a miracle so that the Yidden should be able to perform the mitzvah of Adlakas and Eidos HaMenorah in a way that you won't need this heter, this leniency of saying that yes, that the Tumah in this case is permitted. In other words, the fact that Tumah Hutra is in regards to the Avodah of the Yidden, 100% it would have been proper Avodah. But as far as this idea of Chibosan Shal Yisrael, that Hashem wants to show how much the Yidden are precious and how much He loves them, so we want to avoid the Tumah, even if it's in a case that technically it was permitted this time. The Rebbe applies the same thing in our case. If the bedika of the Koyanim in the Beis HaMikdash would be just another one of the things that are done in the Beis HaMikdash, or even part of the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, so then we have a clear halacha. Ein shvus b'mikdash. These shvus prohibitions just don't apply in the Beis HaMikdash. And as the Rambam says that this is a heter that's melechatchila. You could from the outside just use this as absolutely no problem. In other words, melechatchila, there's no isser at all whatsoever. However, since we just said that the bedika, as we established, was part of the Shmiras HaMikdash, part of the Kavod HaMikdash, as we said, it's all coming to emphasize the respect we have, the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. And as the halach is, that what are we, Loimen HaMikdash Atayori, when it says he's supposed to fear the Beis HaMikdash, it's of course not the Beis HaMikdash itself, we're fearing the one who commanded us about fearing the Beis HaMikdash. In a similar way regarding the Kavod HaMikdash. It's the Beis HaMikdash, but it's for Hashem. Therefore, in this case, it's not appropriate, it's not fitting that the bedika that we're trying to do for the Kavod of Beis HaMikdash should be set up lechatchila to be done in a way that we need some sort of heter, some sort of leniency, that because ain't shvus b'mikdash, we could do it in this way. In this particular case, again, because it's for the derech kavod, we don't want to rely on these sorts of leniencies. That wouldn't be part of the respect and part of the kavod. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why. First of all, this detail of the bedika that Shabbos is different to the weekday is in fact part of and shayich and connected to Hilchos Beis HaBchira. Number two, that it actually comes as a halacha for itself. Says the Rebbe, because all of this is bringing out and emphasizing even more the kavod HaMikdash. And what is that? That not only generally did we check the Beis HaMikdash every day in order to make that kavod even more beautiful and better, etc., which is what we discussed in Halacha Yud Aleph, the idea that every day they're checking, and we just established that it means they're checking it as a way of honor, a way of respect. But now comes another halacha, a separate halacha, that this bedika was in the most beautiful muhudadika mechubadika way, which is why the halacha is telling us that on Shabbos we're not even going to use any heter, ein shvuz b'mikdash. Rather, we're going to be using lamps that are burning there from erev Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, in fact, this is the reason why this is the siyum of Perek Ches of Hilchas Beis HaBchira, which generally, as we said, is discussing the kavod of the Beis HaMikdash, because this halacha is really bringing out the kavod of the Beis HaMikdash, the way we're honoring the Beis HaMikdash in the best and highest way. In other words, in a way of what the Rebbe calls hidur mina hidur. So this was all one explanation of why it is that they didn't want to rely on this heter of ein shvuz b'mikdash. The Rebbe is now going to approach it in another way. And interesting, here again, the Rebbe is going to connect it with that same question of Chanukah. So the Rebbe says like this, another way how we could explain it, but again, by first prefacing another point. Regarding to the Malacha and the Beis HaMikdash in Shabbos generally, we find seemingly two opposites. On the one hand, we have the avodah of the karbonos, the tamid, the musaf, and other karbonos tzibur that are a set time. Not only are they doicha Shabbos, they're already pushing off Shabbos, and mutter in Shabbos, but it becomes even a mitzvah to do it on Shabbos. On the other hand, we also know that there's a halacha regarding the Beis HaMikdash, that ein binyan Beis HaMikdash doicha Shabbos. You can't build the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. As is learned in the Mechilt in the beginning of our Parshas Vayakhel, from the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu first gives the command of the Isser, the prohibition of doing Melacha on Shabbos, before giving us the instructions of how to make the Mishkan. So how do these two things go together? You could bring these karbonos on Shabbos, it's a mitzvah to do Melacha, the Melachis of doing the carbon, and yet at the same time, you're not allowed to build a Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, after the Beis HaMikdash is already a full holy place, complete, and we're speaking about a specific detail that's being done in the Beis HaMikdash, a malacha in the Beis HaMikdash, then we'll say that this type of thing is not considered ma'aseh choil, it's not considered a weekday activity, a mundane activity. In Kodesh, in the Beis HaMikdash, every single thing that's being done over there is not considered a mundane activity. Every single thing is considered an act of Kedusha. And therefore, it's not considered chilul Shabbos. We're not desecrating the Shabbos by doing a weekday activity. Everything in the Beis HaMikdash is Shabbosdik. However, when we're dealing with making the Beis HaMikdash, in other words, we're establishing the Beis HaMikdash, we're establishing the Kedusha from the outset. So here, says the Rebbe, there's no room that it should be done with a ma'aseh, with an act that has chilul Shabbos involved, when we're trying to establish this Kedusha in the first place. And again, as said, the Rebbe connects it with what we're discussing about Chanukah. So the Rebbe says, this is similar to another beer that some of the Mefarshim give regarding the nace of Shemen and Chanukah. That the reason why they didn't use it, they couldn't use this idea, this klal, that the tumah was, hutra, that the tumah was permitted in that case, is because in that case they were trying to be machanech the Beis HaMikdash, they were trying to dedicate the Beis HaMikdash, the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash in a certain sense anew. And therefore, when you're trying to establish a new Kedusha because of all the desecration that went on, etc. So there we can't say that the Tumah Hutra, because we're trying to establish the Kedusha now in the first place. Says the Rebbe, we're now going to discuss this in connection with the Isur Shvuz B'Mikdash. Chachamim generally were Matir Shvuz B'Mikdash in cases when they are connected with an Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, or some sort of malacha in it. However, says the Rebbe, when we're speaking about the building of the Beis HaMikdash itself, as we said before, and in this case, the Rebbe is going to include also the honor of the Beis HaMikdash, we'll soon see why. In this case, the Chachamim were not matir any shvus. We know that the Chachamim generally, whatever they do is ein doiraisa tikun, they do it similar to doiraisa. In this case, they were not matir the shvus. In other words, just like Midoiraisa, we said that Ein Binyan Beis HaMikdash b'Shabbos, we don't make the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash in Shabbos. In a similar way, the Chachamim are also not going to allow you to do this Shavuos in the Beis HaMikdash if right now we're trying to establish the Kedusha or somehow add in it or strengthen the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash itself. In this case, they're not going to allow the Shavuos. How does this fit with what we're saying? So, in order to understand this, the Rebbe first says that in regards to the reason why the halachis of Shmiras and Kavod HaMikdash, the Rambam actually put them into Hilchas Beis HaBchira, and so too Rabbeinu HaKadosh put the dinim of Shmiras HaMikdash, he put them also into Masechta Midos, which is about the Midos Habayis, the measurements of the house itself, of the Beis HaMikdash itself. Why isn't it just in the area that are discussing the avodas that are done in the Beis HaMikdash? Says the Rebbe, so we discussed this already in other places, that it is that the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the obligation of Binyan Beis HaMikdash, is not really the act of building the Beis HaMikdash. It's more about the result of the act, that we have a Beis HaMikdash. As the Ragachover explains this at length. Applying this to Shmiras HaMikdash, says the Rebbe, now we can understand why Shmiras HaMikdash is actually considered part of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, part of the Beis HaMikdash itself, part of making the Beis HaMikdash. Because guarding the Beis HaMikdash is causing it to be a Beis HaMikdash in a certain sense. It's causing it that it should be a house of honor, a place that's fitting to be the Beis HaBchira. This is part of what's making up the Beis HaMikdash. If that's the case, says the Rebbe, so what comes out is that when the Kohanim are checking every single day in the Beis HaMikdash, and as we established, we said that it's part of the Kavod Beis HaMikdash, and it's not only a hachana, a preparation for the avodah of the day, but in a certain sense, they are establishing now, this is a continuation of part of them establishing the Beis HaMikdash. That honor, as we said, is establishing the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, this bedika is similar to, like the idea of bedek habayis, when we're fixing something in the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, the bedika, as part of the honor, is making the Beis HaMikdash now a more respectable place, an honorable place, etc. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why we say this, why we don't use the klal over here of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash when it comes to the fire, and we say, no, don't use the fire, because we don't say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, because since the idea of checking it, as we just said, is part of the Binyan HaMikdash, you're establishing the Beis HaMikdash, the honor of the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedusha, the very essence of the very idea of the Beis HaMikdash itself, in which we just said that the Torah says that when we're building the Beis HaMikdash, we don't push off Shabbos. This is why, again, the Chachamim that do things similar to the way the Torah, they also are misaken, and in this case, it's not going to push away the Isur of this Shvus. Says the Rebbe, with this we can actually see the connection and connect the beginning of Hilchos Beis HaBchira and the end of the Hilchos Beis HaBchira. We know a concept of Nod, Soifim, Tchilos, and the end is always connected to the beginning. In the beginning of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, the Rambam establishes the Geder of Mitzvahs Binyan Beis HaBchira. And he says, what is it? La sois bayis la Hashem, to make a house for Hashem. But he specifically does not use the word livnois, to build, from which it's actually learned that the mitzvah, as we said before, is not the actual building itself, but the result. That we have a house for Hashem with all of the details that such a house needs to have. Says the Rebbe, this is the same point that we're emphasizing in the last pedic of Hilchos Beis HaBchira. Because as we said before, that the whole idea of Shmiras HaMikdash is part of the Hilchos Beis HaBchira. Why do we say it's part of Hilchos Beis HaBchira? Because this is part of what's making up the Beis HaMikdash. So even though, again, there is technically a Beis HaMikdash already, but the fact that we're guarding it, this is part of what's making it up, even though it's not technically building. But this is what's giving it its honor. Until we finally come to the very, very end, as it's expressed in the end of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, that because of this, that it's a detail of the build of the making of the Beis HaBchira, this is why it's not going to be Doicha Shabbos, as we say in the very end of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, including not even doing an Inyan of a Shavuos. The Rebbe now concludes B'Pnimi Yisrael Yonim, that the explanation of the beginning of Hilchos Beis HaBchira and the end B'Pnimi Yisrael Yonim. Says the Rebbe, we discussed many times that even though the building of the Mishkan and the Bayis Rishon and Sheni, with all of that we fulfilled the mitzvah of Asuli Mikdash, it still wasn't in a way that the Binyan HaBayis was B'tachlis HaShlemus in its most perfect way. That's going to happen by the Beis HaMikdash that Hashem makes, Mikdash Adnai Koinonu Yadecha, the third Beis HaMikdash that's going to be the everlasting Beis HaMikdash. Says that, but this is the inner reason why the last halacha of Hilchos Beis HaBchira is discussing the Seder, the B'dikas HaZorah of the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. Because it's coming to hint at the end, the Shleimus of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, the Shleimus of Beis HaMikdash, is in the third Beis HaMikdash, La'asid Lava, in the time of Mashiach, which is called Yom Shekulei Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, so one may think, since the Shleimus of the Beis HaMikdash is going to be La'asid Lava, so you might say, does that mean Chas v'Shalom that the current Avodah right now is really insignificant, has no importance, no value, Chas v'Shalom? This is what the Rambam is teaching us. Adrabah, on the contrary. On the night of Shabbos, Ein biyodam, they don't carry the fire, they don't have the fire They don't have that, and they're using the lamps that were burning there from Erev Shabbos. What does that mean? That in the time of Mashiach, Yom Shekuli Shabbos, Ein B'Yodom, they're not carrying the light, they're not carrying the fire, which is Neir Mitzvah V'Toira Oir, as the pasuk says, Shonim Asher Toimar Ein Li Bohem Chayfetz. And the real idea of Avodah is not really going to be in the same way when Mashiach comes. Main Avodah is currently right now. So the light that's going to be in that Yom Shekuli Shabbos is coming from the Neir, from those Neiris, from the mitzvahs that we had lit, that we had done on Erev Shabbos during the time of Golus. The Shleimus of the third Beis HaMikdash, which is then going to be revealed, all of the tremendous milos of our Avodah right now, Ma'aseinu, V'Avidaseinu, everything that we've achieved during the time of Golus. And all of this, of course, gives us more encouragement in the avodah of the Yid to set up that Mikdash and Mishkan Ruchni within himself, Shachanti B'Soichem, inside of each and every Yid. And all of this brings to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, B'Ge'ula HaMitiz V'Hashleima B'Meheira V'Yameinu Mamash.